I am Vibha Chauhan and welcome to Chauhan classes Funda Clear. So today I'll explain the second chapter of Class 10th Economy, and the chapter that we have got here is Sectors of the Indian Economy. So sectors of the Indian economy. Now in this chapter we'll talk about the sectors of the Indian economy. As we are talking about the economics in the economic subject, we are going to talk about Indian economy, and even in that we'll look at the sectors of the Indian economy. You know what, that around you there are many people who are working either in the production work, either in the service work. There are many activities around you that are going. Even as we speak, there are any activities that are going even in nook and corner of the world. So you could say that every minute there is something that is being done, there is some activity that is being done, and you could say that there are a lot of activities, and that is why we can classify them. We should classify them for more ease to understand them, and that classification or that group on the basis of different criterion is known as sectors. So we will talk about the classification of activities that is for the national economy, or more specifically the sectors of the Indian economy. So you could say that in this chapter we will talk about the sectors of the Indian economy, different types of economy, different types of sectors of Indian economy on the basis of different criterion as well, and we'll look at different things, different aspects and perspectives in this chapter. So let's start with this chapter with the first topic, that is sectors of economic activities. So sectors of economic activities. As all of you know that there are a lot of activities going around you, and you could say that there are a lot of classification of them as well. Now most of the activities that are being done, that are going on, that are being continued are derived or are from are used by the natural resources. Like we have derived them through the natural resources. Like for example, the cotton production. Cotton that is grown in a particular season, that is a crop, and you could say that mainly but not entirely we are dependent on the natural factors for the production of that cotton crop. Like for example, rainfall, sunshine and climate. Now these are some of the main natural factors in which we are dependent for the production of cotton crop. And after that, cotton that is a produce of that crop is also a natural product. After that, we example of dairy products as well. Now in dairy products we are dependent on the biological process of animals. So you could say that these are natural products, and that is why we call them primary sectors. Now primary sectors are those in primary sector there are those kind of activities that are derived, that are being done through the natural resources. Like we have derived them from the natural resources, and that is why we call them primary sectors, as they make the base for all other activities. Like you could say that in economy they are the base for all other activities as well. So they are, the first classification could be primary sectors. After that, you could say that we need to process those items as well. We need to process natural products, natural items as well, and that is called as secondary activities, secondary sector of activities, like what we call manufacturing. Now as all of you know that we have already covered manufacturing chapter in geography of this class. You could study that too. Now manufacturing, as all of you know that natural products like dairy products, those kind of products need to be processed as well. Like to make more valuable products, we need to process them in factories, in companies, in those areas, and that is called as manufacturing or the secondary sector. Well, most of these activities take place in industries. They are associated with industries, and that is why we also call them as industrial sectors. Now you could say that secondary activities are also very important, because in primary sectors we had minerals, ores, you could say different types of ores, fishing, agriculture, those kind of things. But after that, if wheat is produced, we need to have biscuits and other items as well, don't we? And that is through the manufacturing process or through the secondary activities. Now third classification is also there that is different from these two, and that is called as tertiary sector. Tertiary sector of Indian economy, or you could say economy, not specifically. Now you know what, that in tertiary sector, it is also called a service sector. It provides service for the primary and secondary sector. For example, transportation, storage, communication, trade. These are the tertiary sectors, you could say. Like for those, you could say that if there is some produce in primary sector and that has to be transported to industry, and for that you will need a train or a truck. That is the tertiary sector because it's connecting these two. And you know what, that the tertiary sectors may not be directly effective for us, like teachers, you could say teachers, doctors, and personal service people like milkmen, cobblers, washermen, and all those who are doing the administrative work and accounting work are also a part of tertiary sector. So you could say that the tertiary sector may or may not provide directly benefits to you, but it is all these middle, you could say that intermediate kind of opportunities and works are the tertiary sector of economy. So you could say that these three are the classifications. Like you could say that tertiary sector is mainly those things that provide services to the primary sector and secondary sector. Secondary sector is merely is constricted to the, you could say, processing of primary products into the secondary products. And primary, as all of you know, that it is also known as agricultural sector, as most you could say that it is also known as agriculture and related sector because most of the products are agricultural. And you know what, that these three sectors are dependent on each other, like they cannot live without one or two. Like for example, you could say that there is a farmer who is growing cotton and he's refusing to pay, you could say that, to sell that cotton to companies. Then the companies would be at loss, wouldn't they be? So they are dependent on the cotton farmer. And at the same time, if that company is refusing that particular farmer to take his, you could say that, to give price for that cotton, to give good price for that cotton, that cotton farmer would also be in loss. And after that you know what, that in agriculture we need a lot of tools and services as well. Like for example, pump sets, insecticides, pesticides, that has to be provided through the tertiary sector. And if the cost of those products is so high, then what would be done? So you could say that imagine how everything goes on. Everyone is dependent on each other, isn't it? Like primary sector is dependent on secondary sector, secondary and tertiary, tertiary and primary, secondary and primary. So you could say that all are interconnected with each other. They cannot live without each other. So they are, you could say, the sectors of the economic activities. After that, we have the next topic, that is comparing the three sectors. So comparing the three sectors, now there can be some comparison between these three sectors, primary, secondary and tertiary. What can be that comparison? Let's talk about it with the next topic, subtopic, that is how do we count the various goods and services and know the total production in each sector? So how do we count the various goods and services and know the total production in each sector? A very good question, it might rise in your minds. Now you know what, that there are three sectors in academic activities, and those academic activities should be compared as well. You could say that there should be some comparison to say that in this country there is more production from this sector is more developed, or this sector is less developed. Like you could say that how can we even count those things? Like how can we count nails, furniture, cars, computers? Like they are so much in this world, or even in our country, in our area, they are just so much. How can we compare them by counting them? And that is why many economists prefer that. Many big economists have suggested that we should not count the number of those items, but instead we should count their values. Like for example, if there are 10,000 kgs of wheat, that is around 5 rupees per kg, then its value becomes 50,000. There is no need to count that 10,000 wheats and we are going to count their particles. So you could say that the value must be added, not their, you could say, not their number or how many they are. After that, like for same example, if there are 1,000 coconuts and 10, you could say that 10 rupees per coconut, then its value would be 10,000. There is no need to count that 1,000 coconuts. So you could say that instead of counting a number of things, we should count its value and then add it and then say the total production for each sector. And even while counting those values, you should remember one thing, that you have to count the final goods, the value of the final goods instead of all all the intermediate items. Like for example, if a farmer has grown wheat, he would sell it to the mill company. You could say that a wheat mill, and in that wheat mill, wheat will be grinded into wheat flour, and that wheat flour would be sold to the biscuit company, and that biscuit company would make biscuit, 4 packets of biscuit out of it, with using sugar and oil. So you could say that you don't have to add the values of wheat and then wheat flour and then biscuits. You just have to take the value of the biscuits instead of taking the values of intermediate items, because in that biscuit price there will be price of every intermediate items. So instead of counting the same thing many times, you should count you should have the value only of the final goods, final produce, you could say. So you could say that there are 2 things. First of all, that we need to take the value of the final goods so that we can have the final production of each sector, and those production from each sector include, you could say that after adding them comes the GDP of a country, that is gross domestic product. Now gross domestic product is the total production from each sector. Like each sector you have the total production, and after adding those total production from all the 3 sectors, then it would become the GDP of a country, and that shows how much a country is developed. Because if a country has more and more GDP, then it's good, isn't it? Like it will have more development. So you could say that there is a need of more GDP for the development of a country, and we need to see only the final goods instead of intermediate goods. After that, we have the next subtopic, that is historical change in sectors. So historical change in sectors. Now if you talk about the developed countries, like those who have developed already, now what would you see them? If we talk about the historical change in their sectors of economic activities, what have you seen? Now what would you see that around 200 years ago, or around, you could say even more than that, earlier, for a long history there was like more employment, more work in a primary sector. Like agriculture was the basis of everything, wasn't it? Like in history there was a lot of work of agriculture, as we already discussed in history chapters in previous classes. Now you know what, that in those developed countries there was more production, more employment in primary sector. But after that, around 100 years ago, as manufacturing came up, as industries came up, factories came up, a lot of people had to do work. Either they were forced or they were doing work in factories, as we already discussed in the history chapter of this class SST. So you could say that either they were forced or they had to do work, and they were exploited in those factories or industries by working as a worker in those. And after that, what we have seen that there is more and more employment, more and more production in secondary activities. And now even what we can see that even after that, we are seeing that there is more and more worker in not tertiary sectors in those developing countries. So you could say that in those developing countries there is a lot of historical change. Like their base was agriculture, was primary sector. After that they went to the secondary sectors and tertiary sectors. So you could say that is about historical change in, you could say that, sectors of economic activities. After that we have the next topic, that is primary, secondary and tertiary sectors in India. So primary, secondary and tertiary sectors in India. Now we have some graphs in your books like that of 1972 to 1973 and 2014 to 2015. Like on the basis of those graphs, on the basis of many studies, we can have the kind of a survey of primary, secondary and tertiary sectors in our country, in India. Like we can talk about which has more employment, which has more people working, which has more unemployment. Let's talk about those aspects with subtopics by subtopics. Now first of all, let's talk about rising importance of the tertiary sector in India. So rising importance of tertiary sector in India, or in Indian production, you could say. Now you know what, that when we look at the graphs, when we look at the results of surveys, what you would see that compared to 1973 and 1974 data and that of 2013 to 14 data, we can see that the tertiary sector has grown so much. Like tertiary sector has so much GDP in our country, has so much production in our country, has the most contribution, around 60% to 70% contribution in the Indian economy, in the Indian production. And why is it so? There must be some factors, because around the area, you could say around the time of 1973 and 1974, there was the most production was contributed by the primary sector, like in agriculture and in those areas. So why now there is more production in tertiary sector? There must be some factors about it, because now we have declared, the Indian government has declared that tertiary sector has the most production in India, you could say in Indian economy. So there must be some factors behind it as well. Now first of all, in any of the developing countries, what are the most needed things? There are some basic services that are needed by the people, that are needed by the common citizens of that country, like for example hospitals, police, you could say police services or police stations, we have railway stations, courts, administrative officers, and insurance companies, banks. These are some basic services that every citizen does need. Like we all need educational institutions, health institutions, those kind of things. So you could say that those basic services are must for any developing country or even a developed country, and for that is also comes on under tertiary sector, doesn't it? So you could say that under tertiary sector those basic services come, and that is why there is more production in tertiary sectors, and those basic services are also provided by the government of a country. So that could be the first factor behind the production of tertiary sector in India. After that, you could say that as the production in primary sector and secondary sector grows more and more, there is a need of tertiary sector, isn't it? Like if there is more production in primary sector, then there will be more need kind of transportation, more communication, more kind of those tertiary sectors. So you could say that as there is more development in primary sectors and secondary sectors, there would be the need of tertiary sector as well. Like you can't neglect this fact. After that, as the income of people rise, what they would need, that they would need to tour some places, they would need tourism, they would need some private facilities, like some private people, private cars, those kind of facilities, and kind of you could say that go shopping, go eating outside in restaurant, and that also comes under tertiary sectors. So you could say that as income of the people also rises, their kind of demands, their satisfaction also rises. So you could say that could also be one of the factors behind the production of tertiary sectors. And there are a lot of factors in our country, aren't there? Like people are the one who are responsible for the most production of tertiary sector in Indian economy. But however, you could say that in tertiary sector there is a lot of production, but some people are of, you could say that, are of very skilled, have so much knowledge, and some people are just you could say are just working in shops and are just pulling up the carts, are just vendors, and are also tertiary sectors. So you could say that at one extent it can be very high, and at one extent it can be very low as well. So you could say that the kind of importance of tertiary sector is rising more and more in our country, in Indian production as well. After that, we have the next subtopic, that is where are the most of the people employed? So where are the most of the people employed? Now we have talked about the production, and tertiary is the first one, like it has won the race, hasn't it? But if we talk about employment, what is it? Like we have to see different aspects and perspectives, don't we? Now you know what, that when we talk about employment, secondary, let's start with secondary activities. Now secondary sector has risen, you could say has raised around, you could say that secondary sector has risen so much in production, but has not raised that much in employment. It has raised around 9 times compared to 1973 to 1974 data, to 2013 to 2014 data. It has raised around 9 times more the you could say production. But when we talk about employment, it has only raised around 3 times compared to that of 1973 to 1974 data in 2013 to 2014 data. And when we talk about the tertiary sector, it has raised around 14 times in employment but has raised around 5 times, only 5 times in employment. Why is so? Like it has raised so much in production but not in employment. Employment continues to be the most largest in kind of primary sector or in agriculture and related sector. So you could say that that could be a very big factor in this sector as well, because most of the production is in tertiary sector and in secondary sector. So while the most of the population is engaged with agriculture activities in primary activities, there are many regions, and one of the concept is of underemployment. You know what, let's take an example. There is a farmer, very kind of poor farmer whose name is Lakshmi. Now she has a land of 2 hectares and that is also unirrigated land, and on that land she grows jawar and bajra, and there are 5 family members in her family, and all of them do cultivation work on that just small piece of land. So that could be example of underemployment. You know what, that there are not that much people needed just for that small plot of land. Like only 2 people are sufficient for growing crops on that piece of land. There is not need of that much people, that much labor on that land. That will be wasting their potential, wasting their energy in that. So you could say that, you know what, in secondary sector, in tertiary sector, there is production about 4/5, but the employment is even less than half of the people. But on the other hand, when we talk about the primary sector, it has even more than half of the population engaged in it. But when we talk about the production, it's not even the half. So why is it so? It means that people who are engaged in the primary sectors are not doing the work with their full potential, and that is why we can say that thing is underemployment. Like in the case of Lakshmi, what is happening, that 5 people are just too much for that small piece of land. 2 people are sufficient for that piece of land. And on the other hand, suppose if there is a big farmer, big kind of a landowner who has hired 2 or 3 members from her family, then they would earn more and more. That would be good, and after that you could say that would be more enough for their family. So you could say that would be underemployment. Like 5 people doing work, they are doing work, they would be seen as employed, but they are disguised unemployment. That is also known as disguised employment. Underemployment is also known as disguised unemployment, because it's a kind of unemployment, isn't it? Like they are doing work but are not earning that much. Like for example, those people who are like part-time, you could say that those people who don't have the permanent jobs are known as kind of disguised unemployment. Like for example, many people search for works and you could say that finally get the work temporarily. Like they get the work temporarily as painters, as pulling of the carts, vendors, and those kind of things. So they earn a very little, and that also can be seen in tertiary sectors. So you could say that in primary sector there is a lot of kind of people not doing work with their full potential, because they can't have the opportunities of employment, and that is why for showing that they are employed, they do the work which are not necessarily for them. Even without them, there would be no effect on the production by that work. So you could say that just removing that much family member from Lakshmi, you could say from Lakshmi's family, there are a lot of farmers like Lakshmi in our country. So even if we remove lakhs of people from our country, from the primary sector, from our country, there will be no effect on the production from the primary sector. But if we add those people in tertiary sector, if we provide them with more and more opportunities, then there will be more and more production in our countries, wouldn't there be? And with no effect with the production of you could say primary sectors in agriculture and related sector. So you could say that those kind of undisguised unemployment or underemployment, we have to decrease that, we have to erase that from our country. Otherwise there will be less development and we will just be a developing country, never be developed country. So you could say that is why we need to have more and more employment, providing more and more opportunities to the people, and that could be seen more and more primary sectors, but that could be seen in tertiary sectors as well. Like many people do the work in shops, you could say that they are selling vegetables, like vendors, pulling of carts, and like they are painters, plumbers, and those kind of things, temporary jobs. So you could say that we need to erase that kind of thing, and we have to we need to have more and more employment in tertiary and secondary sectors, with giving them, providing them good opportunities of employment. And how to create that opportunity, let's talk about it with the next subtopic, that is how to create more employment. So how to create more employment? Let's take with the example of Lakshmi. Like what could be done in Lakshmi's case for more employment? Like first of all, her land was unirrigated. So government or kind of you could say or any local bank could do that, could provide money to her and could build a kind of a canal or dug a well for her, like for irrigating that land, that piece of land, so she could kind of grow more and more crops. Like she could grow like another crop like wheat and any other crop in rabi season with other crops as well. So you could say that on that piece of land she would like 2 people would be employed on that piece of land for 50 days for wheat crop, like including harvesting, sowing and those kind of things. It would take 50 days for employment of those people. After that, she doesn't need just water for her land. She also needs fertilizer, pesticides, insecticide, many other tools like pump sets, you could say pipes for land. And for that she is a poor farmer, isn't she? So she would need more and more money, and she would have to borrow from a local land, you could say local money lender, and who would give her money with a lot of interest. And that is why government should take some actions here. Like government should provide some money and credits to that farmer, to any of the poor farmers, and that we'll discuss in the next chapter. That is money and credit. Chapter 3 will the next chapter is that, and we'll talk about some government actions about the credit to the farmers. And after that, what government should do for more employment is that it should provide, like even in the rural areas, even in backward areas, it should provide more and more industries, industrial opportunities, factories, those kind of developed things in those rural areas, so that there will be more development. And after that, like for example, they should open kind of honey in an area where there is a honey production. What they can do, that they can open a honey center where farmers would come up, collect the honey and those kind of things. After that, they can also open at rural areas the vegetable processing and procuring areas, like procuring and processing centers, where like you could say where vegetables like sweet potato, tomatoes, those kind of so vegetables would be processed and procured. And there are some acts by the government as well, like we have NCERT 2005, like that is Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act 2005. Now you could say that is also known as right to work, and that is applied around 625 districts of our country, especially in rural areas, not in urban cities. Now according to this act, what happens that every person who is in need of work, who needs to work, or who is in the need of work should be provided with job for at least 100 days by the government. And if government fails in doing so, like if government can't provide job to that person, then it would have to give unemployment allowances to that person. So you could say that is a very good act for those people as well, like they should be provided like that allowances, and so you could say opportunities should be like that in future it would increase the production from their land. So there are a lot of things that government can do. It just has to take kind of measures. Like you could say that there are many things that will take a lot of time to be recognized and implemented, and that is why we need to have some quick measures like NCERT 2005 and many other acts. So you could say that we'll talk about it in higher classes as well, and in next chapter as well. So you could say that how we can create more employment like this. Government has to take actions. Not everyone, like government has to take action, and we need to be aware as well. We need to spread awareness among the people. After that, we have the next topic, that is division of sectors as organized and unorganized. So division of sectors is organized and unorganized. Now there are 2 cases given in your book. Now first there is a case of Kanta, now who works in an office. She has to work from, you could say, from 8:30 to 5:30 in the evening. So from 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. in the evening. And after that, you could say that she has a very good salary for her work, and whenever she overworks, she has over salary as well. She has leaves on Sundays, and you know what, that it is a paid holiday. Like it's not like she will leave on Sundays and she would not get paid. Like it is a paid holidays, and she has another benefits, like she has medical allowances and other kind of allowances from her office. And on in contrast, there is another case of Kamal, who is a neighbor of Kanta. Now he works in the shop, grocery shop. In a grocery shop, he has to work from 7:30 to around 8 p.m. in the evening, and you could say that's a large amount of hours to work in a day, and he would not get paid holiday, like he has to work every day, and whenever he leaves for his work, he would not be paid, and he doesn't even have any kind of appointment or any kind of statement stating the terms and conditions for the work. So it's not a permanent job, like he can be, you could say that his owner, his boss can suspend him, fire him anytime, anywhere, anytime. So you could say that he can be asked to leave the work anytime. It's not a permanent job, we could say. Now you could say that Kamal is, or you could say that is working in an organized sector. Now you could say that she is employed in an organized sector. Organized sector provides all kind of facilities, like it's a permanent job. There will be job security and a kind of medical allowances and rules and regulations, so that the workers would not be exploited will be followed in those kind of organized sector work. And on in contrast, Kamal work in an unorganized sector. Now unorganized sector doesn't have a job security, it doesn't even have paid holidays or provident, you could say there are only salaries or wages, you could say there is no other salary, like you could say that there are no bonus and other things that are given to the workers, and even here overworks, there will be no other salary, and there are no that kind of benefits by the employer. So you could say that there can be another classification on the basis of organized and unorganized sectors of the economy, and you could say that we can say that organized is better compared to unorganized. There are many laws for protecting the workers, like Factories Act, Minimum Wages Act, we have Shops and Establishments Act, after that we have Provident Gratuity Act. There are many acts, aren't there, but they have to be followed as well. That are followed in organized sector but not in unorganized sector. So you could say that there is another classification, and the next subtopic that we have here is how to protect workers in the unorganized sectors. So how to protect workers in the unorganized sector. Now you know what, that unorganized sector don't have any kind of job security at all. Like organized sector do have, like they even give the holidays, paid holidays. After that, in unorganized sector, even if you're sick, you don't have any holiday. If you leave the work, if you could say that if you're on the leave for the work, your salary will be cut off. There will be cut off from your salary. So you could say that that's a very kind of forcing on the worker, like by employer. There will be a lot of you know what, that even the organized sector enterprises are adopted in unorganized sector to evade taxes and to exploit laws that are for saving, for you could say that for saving the workers. It's like you could say that for saving the rights of laborers and workers working in those sectors. So you could say that is why those people, many of the workers, are forced to do work in unorganized sector. Another reason is also that organized sector is expanding very slowly, and that is why workers are kind of forced to do work in unorganized sector. And you know what, that working environment is not good. Working hours even are not better. Like there will be a lot of force on the workers, and it's not just like good healthy for the workers. Unorganized sector can't be better. It exploits the workers, you could say. And you know what, that in rural areas we have, like you could say that even it won't be permanent. They can be asked to leave the work anytime. Like in rural areas, what happens that big landowners, what they do, that they have big landowners or farmers, big farmers hire some laborers. They would grow the crops, and when the season has ended, they would have to leave the work. So that would be unemployment, temporary work, wouldn't it be? After that, in urban areas, we have many people working as casual workers, casual laborers in construction sites, and you could say garment making, rag picking, and like those kind of things, like street vendors, those kind of things. So you could say that these kind of casual workers is an example of unorganized is an example of an unorganized sector. And you know what, that many of the mostly scheduled tribes, scheduled tribes, scheduled castes and backward communities find themselves working in unorganized sector. So we must protect them as well. We need to have some laws, acts and action so that we can protect them as well, because the working conditions should be good for those workers as well. Like for development of the country, there will be development of every and each person, citizen of the country, and that is why we need to protect those unorganized sector workers as well. You know what, since 1990s, what is happening that many of the workers are seen to leave their jobs, have to leave their jobs because of the employer. Like they are asking them to leave anytime. They don't even have any job security. After that, the next and last topic of this chapter is sectors in terms of ownership, public and private sectors. So sectors in terms of ownership, public and private sectors. Now we have seen classification, unorganized and organized. After that, we have another classification on the terms of ownership, that is public sectors and private sectors. Public sector and private sector, like I guess all of you know that all of you might know about these sectors. Now public sector, that is provided by the government, that is whose assets and the work for which responsibility is of government, and private sectors for which responsibility and assets are of an individual or the company. Like for example, we have railway stations, post offices as a public sector, and we have Tata Steel and Iron, you could say company limited, like Tisco company, and after that Reliance Limited. Those kind of are private sectors. So these kind of things are private. These kind of sectors, companies are private sector companies, and public like railway station, roads, bridges, dams, construction, generating electricity. Those kind of works, activities are on the basis of public sector activities. Now you know what, private sector is merely for their own profit, for earning their own profit, for making their own profit, and public sector is not just for making their own profit. Like it's not like they would make their own loss, but it's not like they would only make their profit. It's merely for the public purpose, for the people. Like government can take money through the taxes, those kind of things, and on from this that expenses, those money, what it do that it makes all the public sectors like constructing roads, bridges, dams, and those kind of things. So those kind of things provide services are provided by the public, by the government of our country. And you know what, that you could say without the encouragement of public, of government, the private sectors cannot run out. You know what, that it is beyond the capacity of the private sector to provide us with those, you could say, provide us with those services that public sector provide us with. You know what, that roads, and for constructing the roads, for constructing the bridges, for building the dams, for generating electricity, there will be a lot of capital that is needed, and that is beyond the capacity of any private sector. And even if it provides that, then it is impossible for it to provide the same cost, with the same cost of production to the same cost of selling to the consumer. And that is why electricity is generated by the government, then that company would sell it to us with a reasonable price. So it would be impossible for the private sector to provide us with those services at a reasonable cost that can be provided only to the government of our country. And we have seen in the, you could say, in the last class economics about the food security, in which we saw that the government, so you could say, buys the crop, the produce from the farmers at a fair price, stores it in its you could say in its godowns, and sells it in ration houses that is provided by the government to the consumer at a reasonable cost. So that is also a kind of public sector kind of service to us. So you could say that private sector is mainly for the profit, public sector is mainly for us, and both are reasonable at their own arena. Like both are good for their own purpose. So that is all we have seen in this chapter. Now public government must spend in these things, in these services. If it can, then it would be just like we are done for the government. You know what, that government has to take responsibility for everything, each and everything going in the country. So that is all we have seen in this chapter. Now we talked about, you could say, classification, education, primary, secondary, and tertiary. We saw that in our country, in India, there is a large production tertiary sector around 60 to 70%, but employment is around 65% in you could say in primary sector. And you know what, that in a survey that is conducted by the SY Planning Commission of our country, Planning Commission now that is known as Niti Aayog, NITI, Niti and Aayog, like it has conducted a survey in which it has seen that you know what, in our country there is a population of 60%, which is around the age group of 5 to 29, but only 51% of them are in educational institutions. Either they are in poor conditions or they are in child labors. And if you provide, you could say that according to survey, what is that, if there is more and more educational service to each and every person of those people, then there will be around a lot of opportunities for employment for many people. Like there would be need of teachers, you could say staffs, peons, principals, those kind of things. So there would be a lot of employment, and same goes for tourism as well. If tourism is more and more in our country, it could provide the employment for around 35 lakh people. Even if it's low according to our population, it's still good according to other countries' population. So that's we have seen in this chapter. After that, we talked about how to create more employment, and we saw that about MG 2005 and many other things we did see. After that, there is organized and unorganized sector, private sector, public sector. So there can be three classifications. First could be on the basis like primary, secondary, tertiary. Second could be organized and unorganized. Third could be private and public. So that's all we have covered in this chapter. I've covered all the topics and subtopics. Stay tuned for upcoming videos, and the next chapters of this book will be covered in the further upcoming videos. So thank you very much.